Test. Hello everyone, welcome to the EFL Grand Final of Thessaloniki Worlds. Congratulations to all teams for making it this far. In opening government, we have FSU Jena. In opening opposition, we have NTU Athens. In closing government, we've got Brawijaya. And in closing opposition, we have UKIM. My name is Nick Chung. I'm the chair of the panel, and joining me are Sarah Balakrishnan, Josh Sopper, Angie Hume, Nita Rao, Elle Jones, Chanel Chan, Gabriel Bose-Witten, and Charity McCullough. Thanks. Before we start, I'd like to ask the speakers to please introduce their pronouns, starting with opening government.
First one is Tina. She prefers she. I'm Patricia. I prefer she as well.
Opening opposition.
Maria Rusi speaking first. She.
Theodore, and I do not want to answer.
Closing government.
Nadia speaking first, prefer she.
Aris speaking second, prefer he.
Teodora Stolevska, she. Milka Gerovska, she.
Okay, thank you everyone. The motion before the House today is this House believes that campaigners for refugee protection should not use pictures displaying the graphic suffering of refugees as part of their advocacy. I can do it, you can do it. All good? Okay, I now welcome the Prime Minister to begin the debate.
Am I audible? Yes. Honorable panel, at the moment, the world has to deal with a refugee crisis of an extent we never had to face before. Millions of people flee from Syria, flee from dictatorship, flee from bad living conditions. And what we want on government side, what we think all people, all in this room are willing to reach, is that we could help these people, that we could improve their life, that we could give them a life in dignity, that we could give them hope for the future. We think that this is also a reason why lots of campaigners try to use in the past pictures of refugees, which showed them in a suffering condition. And we think on government side that these campaigners shouldn't use pictures displaying the graphic suffering of refugees as part of their campaigns. Why do we think that? On the one hand, we believe that to make things better for the refugees, the most thing we have to reach is to persuade the European population. We have to persuade the European population that they agree to help those people. And we think that we won't reach this goal in the long run if we just do it on an emotional level, which these pictures intend. On the other hand, we think that those pictures are a humiliation of the dignity of those refugees, a point I will go to explain later. First, what is graphic suffering? I explained that we think, for example, of pictures like the dead boy Aylan or overcrowded boats in the sea, which shows the refugees suffering. Clarification? Go ahead.
So, in order to even capture the attention of the people, don't you believe that we need the emotional component which these pictures produce?
We understand that you may think so, but we on government side will show you that it's just a short-term goal. It can't implement the exception of those refugees in the long run. This is what we are going to show on the government side. This is why we should propose the motion. This is, if you want to help the refugees, you have to go with the government's side today. So, first of all, why we think these pictures, no thanks, are a humiliation of the dignity of those people. So, in these situations, they are showed on these pictures. They are suffering, they are in bad conditions, and we think that it would be a goal from us that these refugees are also seen as people, as humans, and not as suffering people, that we want that they are accepted for the human dignity. And we think if they had gone through war, if they had gone through so many bad conditions, then it is a fundamental goal of our side that we want to give back their human dignity, that we want to feel them as people. And we think that is a goal we want to reach on this side of the house, and therefore we can't agree that we just show those pictures. How is the campaign working? So we think those campaigners aim to affect mainly two groups. On the one hand, we have people who already sympathize with the refugees. And we think for these people, we don't need more persuasive arguments. These people are already going to help. You see it, for example, the welcome culture in Germany. We are totally proud of that. And we think for those people, we don't need more persuasion. But on the other hand, we unfortunately have much people who are not persuaded. And they were not persuaded, the opposition, by those pictures we had in the past. We already have those pictures. We already faced those pictures. And there were not enough to persuade those people. And we think in the future there also won't be enough to persuade those people. We think for those people we have to make rational arguments. For those people it is totally important that we persuade them and don't affect them just on an emotional level. So, in lots of countries, people already distrust the media when it comes to the reportation about the refugees. For example, lots of people claimed that they just showed people from children, and it's simply not true that most of the refugees are children. And we think those disappointments, those proven disappointments, are very bad for the reputation of all the refugees. They all will suffer from that. We think if these people who are not persuaded from the refugees and from welcome the refugees yet, they will feel like they are disappointed, and it will be a totally backlash if they just see those pictures, because they will claim that it's simply not true and they won't be persuaded from those pictures. Therefore, we think we won't reach our goal. And why is it so important that the decision of a country, whether it wants to have refugees or not, is made on a rational level and not on an emotional one? We on government side, no thanks, we want to remember that what we have to face here, that this crisis is totally a hard problem. And we think that we don't have any advantages from from claiming that it is too easy. We think that it is not enough just to show a picture and then one maybe is likely to say, yes, I want the refugees, I want to help them, and then in the long run, when it comes to problems, when it's going to be harder, then they are not confident with that decision anymore. We on the government side, we want to help those people. We want that other people are also likely to help them, but we think to reach that goal, it is fundamentally important that we give those refugees the humanity, and that we persuade all the people who have to make the decisions on a rational and not an emotional level. We think that if you also want to help those people, and if you want to give them the hope for the future, then you are standing with the government side today. Then we beg you to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech, and to begin the case for opposition bench, I welcome the Leader of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that this is an innately hypocritical motion, and we believe that in an issue which is as time-sensitive and as huge as the refugee crisis, we need to prioritize the safety of the people, and we need to do anything we can, anything in our power to help them and get them to safety, to get them to a safe home and a safe environment. And we believe that those graphic images used by campaigners, people who have a good cause and who want to help the refugees, will spur not only an emotional reaction, but also a rational and thought-based approach. And I will prove this to you and bring this debate on the grounds of efficacy and show how those graphic images spur not only emotional reactions, but also generate a sense of immediacy to the problem, and thus can also create political pressure and actual actions. But before I do that, please allow me to take a look at what the proposition case has been so far. So first of all, we didn't actually, no thank you, they didn't fully meet their burden of proof, which first of all is to prove how there are inherent and direct harms in showing those graphic images. We didn't hear what exactly is so bad about those images. So we didn't hear the direct harms of campaigners specifically using those images, because there is a difference, and we didn't really hear anything on that difference. We just heard the assumption that campaigners are like media and like news coverages. No, we respond to that, no, that they're not the same, and that campaigners use those images for the protection of the refugees, as is said in the motion. So they don't prove direct harms, as was a burden of proof. On the other hand, on the other side of the house, we will show you that there is enough benefit, and that even if a significant, if not everyone, but even if a significant amount of people gets sensitive on the issue and does something to help, we have won the debate, because there are enough benefits through our side. So secondly, to the main argument of dignity. So we respond to that this is quite hypocritical, because when you have 50 million people going into ships fleeing wars and huge tragedies, we believe that it's quite hypocritical to talk about a theoretical, westernized notion that is dignity. We believe that what is the priority is to get them to a safe space and to get them to actually survive rather than die and drown in the sea. And how will we do that? We will do that through those graphic images, through the image of Aylan Kurdi who drowned and who spurred huge reaction and who spurred political pressure to change the status quo. So we do not put dignity above all. We believe that those people who are already so hurt and so have been subjected to so many tragedies, we believe that what is more important is to get them to safety. And we will do that, and I will show you how we do that. And thirdly, what we heard was this assumption that rational reaction and persuasion and emotional reaction are something mutually exclusive. We didn't hear any actual constructive and any actual proof as to why the emotional reaction is mutually exclusive to rational actions. And what we respond to that in a second level is that we believe it's more likely for a person to act and to do something in a practical manner if they are at the first level, as a stepping stone, emotionally connected and invested in that issue. And I will be moving on to our constructive and proving how this is the case. So, and I would like to bring the debate on the grounds of efficacy. So this is a very time-sensitive issue, and we need to act, and we need to act now. We do not have huge spaces of time to decide what we will do. So when there are people drowning on our shores, we cannot wait and try to solve this theoretical notion of their dignity. We need to act at the present because this is so time sensitive. So what we need to do as a first level is bring those 50 million people to safety, to a safe and stable home. So what is the status quo, really, ladies and gentlemen? We, on the side of the opposition, would not believe that people are inherently and innately bad. What we believe, however, is that they are kind of apathetic. So the way they usually think and the mechanisms of their brains is generally that if something does not touch them in the most immediate sense, they will probably not do anything about it because they are so invested in their everyday lives that they will probably, and because of the way the human minds and the human people work, they will not do anything. So what we do through our motion is not to cripple the campaigns whose goal is to protect, no thank you, the refugees, but we actually give them an extra help. So, and what is that help? That is the power of the image, and especially graphic image. Because we believe that word graphic means that an image spares shock, outrage, and emotion. And that emotional approach generates empathy and constructs immediacy. The immediacy that is lacking when we have other ways of informing the public. When we just say 50 people were traveling in the Mediterranean, or when we just say something in a theoretical level, we do not feel, the people who hear that information do not feel and do not experience the same emotional response they do when they see an actual person in a war or a person drowning. So we think that through our model, we establish at first as a stepping stone an emotional response that it's absolutely needed because of the way people think. Because we without considering them innately bad people, we believe that they will likely not do anything unless they actually feel that the problem is around them, unless they cannot get away from the problem. And that is through, yes sir, okay, sorry. And that is what happens through those graphic images. We get the message across that you cannot get away from the problem. Those images stay with you. And that is something that forces immediacy of the problem on them, that forces the reality of the problem on them. And why is that more likely to get them to actually react, not just emotionally, as they have assumed, but also practically? Because when someone feels that they are invested in the problem, they are more likely to act. And if just a significant number of people who see a graphic image are inclined to read the text underneath and get informed about the problem, we believe that this is enough benefit. And if those people react emotionally and they put political pressure on the governments, as was the case with Aylan Kurdi, whose father got an asylum after the whole outrage caused by his son's death, we believe that this is something good, this is enough benefit, because we believe that emotion is the first link to action, to awareness, to information, and to political pressure on governments to take a stand and not be ignorant of the problem. So we do not assume that emotional and practical approach are mutually exclusive. We want them both, and we achieve them both. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue the case for opening government, I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
So what is our goal for the European Union in general? We believe our goal should be to find a fair system who can actually enter the EU permanently and who needs to go back. We believe it's fundamentally necessary to find a fair system and fair rules. In order to do that, we need laws, like to create better laws that we're going to stick by. We believe, like shortly, we didn't think that we could reach that. For example, in a worse situation like we saw when Orban closed the borders in Hungary, we saw Merkel did just open the borders and tell everybody to just come. But we think this was like one incident. We don't think that this is a system that will continue to work in the future. We think that as of right now, we should go to be rational again. We believe this rationality is hurted by those emotional campaigns. This is why we very proudly to propose this motion. We say this is a direct clash to the opening opposition, telling us that safe spaces are most important. We say we just have to acknowledge that we can't help everybody, and this is the truth. Okay. So what did Tina show you? She explained that there are two groups in Europe. So we have actually a frontier right now which is hardened every day. We have first of all the people who are xenophobial, and we say that xenophobia isn't rational. We see that it's most likely to be xenophobic if you live in a place where your inhabitants are not exposed to foreigners. And we say there's no way to convince a person who has the illness xenophobia by emotional pictures, because they just won't care. They all saw Ireland on the beach. They all saw the refugees actually sewing up their mouths in order to be let into those European countries. We all saw that, we all know that, but still we are divided. So now we need to persuade the rest of the European population that it is possible, first of all, to help, and that integration is possible. And we have to do that in order to have a future, to find a fair system, and no divided frontiers inside of Europe. First argument, ISIS. We believe that we are actually campaigning ISIS by campaigning the wrongdoing of the EU. For example, incarcerating the refugees, but also in Turkey, but also in European countries by not letting them enter, like putting them into horrible places like prisons, by showing how the little island is actually lying on the beach. Because ISIS uses that as message for their Muslim brothers. They say, look how the non-Muslim people treat you. They are evil, they just let you die on the beaches, they put you in prison, and we think this is very bad. To actually give ISIS this possibility, we shouldn't do that. ISIS want Europe to fail. They want us not being able to help the refugees. We shouldn't show them how we struggle at all. No thanks. Okay, so again about the two groups. Like the falsification of the refugee crisis. First I talk about the xenophobic group. Okay, most of the refugees that enter into the EU right now are in their middle 20s, like Tina pointed out. And we believe it's like water on the miles of the racists to show, like what do we campaign right now? We show mostly children and women because it's more likely to get emotionally attached if you see the little island instead of some 20-year-old young men from Africa, right? And we also usually show in those campaigns young Syrian families. We don't show, which is also like a big group of people from Eritrea. We don't show those young men. And we say this is actually a falsification. Okay, especially it's true because we already have those strong group of opposers. For those opposers who actually demonstrate weekly in European cities, we have them, that they already have the feeling that the media is lying to them. So we cannot successfully touch their hearts by actually showing those pictures. Because we believe the only real way to get them on our side is the rational arguments. So we say emotionally they are so against the whole, there are refugees coming that they won't be persuaded, we cannot touch their heart by showing those pictures. And for the other group, the welcome culture group we call them, they already know the suffering, right? They already saw the nasty pictures which are taking the dignity away, like Tina pointed out. For example, like those refugees that are filled up in those huge boats, they saw the people sawing their mouths. So we already, all in this room, everybody saw the disgusting pictures of people taking their dignity away. So we already know that they suffer, right? So we don't need like any more pictures pointing that out. We already saw it already. Why don't you think so?
All right. So having people that right
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, it might was a good idea to show a few pictures in the beginning. But as of right now, we don't need that anymore. We don't need to be that emotional anymore. What we need right now, we were emotional in the past. That's why, for example, Merkel opened the border. But as of right now, we should go back to a fair system. We should go back to rationality. So this is actually why we want more rational, we want to have the people think rational and don't confuse them by emotional pictures so that they cannot really think anymore. Okay,
Madam.
so, no thanks. The analogy would be like, for example, many newspapers refuse to show decapitations of journalists by the ES. Why did they do so? We believe, if I read in the newspaper, there are people being decapitated, like cutting their throat. Okay, so everybody can imagine it. We don't need to see it, right? I mean, if we read it, we can already imagine it's horrible, it's struggling, and it's awful and bad. We don't need to see it all over and over and over again. No, thank you. Okay, so we believe actually that those pictures aren't needed if you're already persuasive then. Okay, so overall, so we did show in this debate okay, yeah, so we did show in this debate that actually those campaigners do more harm than good, because we already have a divided situation, right? So we shouldn't continue to divide it even further, because as of right now, we have those people already knowing it, so won't be persuaded, they already are, and the others won't be persuaded by emotional pictures again. They saw them and it didn't work, like Tina already mentioned. So we believe in order to have, like, first of all, to help as many people as possible, to have fair rules, like, I think it's very unfair if I'm suddenly happen to be in front of the Orban border, I get helped and can enter, and if I'm in another country, I won't get help. We think this is unfair. There should be fair rules for everybody, not based on I happen to be in the right place at the right time where there was a great picture taken of me. We think this is fundamentally wrong and unfair. So we are very, very proud to oppose in order to have fair rules for the future and no emotional biases. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech, and to conclude the opening half of the debate, I welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Can everybody hear me? Yes? Good. Right. 1 second. Mr. Chair, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, 50 million people right now for us is just a statistic, ladies and gentlemen. 50 million refugees coming to our shores, to us, might sound bad, but it does not affect us that innately, that emotionally. Seeing the pictures of a person drowning with his family on the shores of the Aegean is what triggers both an emotional response in the immediacy of sending food and sending aid, and a logical response in the long run. Today, side proposition needed to prove to us, first of all, on the basis that they base their case, why do these images cause only emotional responses? And second of all, why is this emotional response innately bad? They have done neither today, ladies and gentlemen. We see a benefit both in the emotional responses triggered and in the logical responses. Our case covers a greater area than theirs. We believe we are currently winning this debate. No, thank you. Today, I'm going to talk to you a bit more about the time sensitivity of the refugee problem and how, especially in that context, our side helps the refugees more. But before I do this, let's just tackle some of the issues that were brought forth by side proposition in this debate. First of all, the issue of dignity. Right. They said that by showing some pictures, we are basically portraying refugees as not being human. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about refugees whose houses have been bombed, whose families have been killed, whose dignity has been erased by ISIS, by war, by people not allowing them to live a better life. No, thank you. What we need to do as a society that has the means to help them is find a solution now. And this is what actually brings dignity back. Ladies and gentlemen, people being brought to tears by an image, people being determined, filled with determination to help the refugees because of an image they saw is something that is good and is something that restores the dignity that we talked about. No, thank you. All right, let's discuss the second thing they said, which is basically about the shock value of these pictures and how that is bad. Again, I say we have not heard a concrete reason why people's response to this is entirely emotional. What we say on our side is that it triggers both A, an emotional response, and B, sometimes in some people in a significant amount, no thank you, in a significant amount of people, it triggers them to want to read more on the issue. It triggers them to want to involve themselves, and in some cases even volunteer. We believe that we don't need to prove that this is going to happen, no thank you, every single time somebody sees an image like this, but we believe that it happens in a significant part of these times, and that both these responses are good and necessary to solve the problem. No thank you. Okay, and no thank you. Let's discuss the introduction, basically, to the second speech that was made by Opening Government. They talked about how we currently, as the European Union, need to find a fair system of entrance of who comes in and who comes out through rational legislators. Fantastic. We entirely agree with this. First of all, they didn't show why this is harmed by our case, right? Legislators can still have a completely rational way of thought and have campaigners campaigning to people to give stuff, money, and help to the refugees. Second of all, the Brussels mechanism is entirely and extremely slow. We need sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, a knee-jerk response is all we need. Sometimes, no thank you, we need to get people in Lesbos into safety, to housing, to not freeze to death before we can think of a rational way of the EU to finally work. No thank you. Right, and two more points. First of all, the stuff about ISIS being strengthened when the EU seems to be failing. We find this a bit insane. First of all, we don't know how this entirely connects to the case. Second of all, the response to this is European Union, get your beep together, right? Because in this case, if ISIS is strengthened when the EU fails, we just want a better EU system. No, thank you. And last point of the rebuttal on the kind of random thing about xenophobia, we think that only a completely insane person would see a picture of a dead child and be filled with hate and not compassion. In the end, we see that the proposition's case is something that does not either prove, no thank you, either prove first of all why they have only an emotional, people have only an emotional response to these pictures, or second of all, why that emotional response is inherently bad. This is why their case falls. Yes, closing.
Okay. In order to attract people's attentions, why you are not using statistics, even fact, on how many food they are lost to attract people to donate in your case?
Right. Could you repeat the point, but not in the microphone, because I can't hear through the...
Why you are not using the statistic, how many refugees exist and how many food that you are need that makes donator come toward you?
Right, fantastic. On that point specifically about knowing the correct statistics about the refugees, we think that A, campaigners can have this not in an image on the side of this image, and second of all, it is the duty of the news media, which are kind of out of this debate in the first place. Great, no thank you. Case. Right, about the time sensitivity of the emotion. On our side, we still think that we trigger, in a significant majority of the people, we trigger a thoughtful response that is logically thought through. Maria explained this in her case. But what we say is that even if we have an emotional and knee-jerk response, right, to a horrifying picture, that's not inherently bad, because the goals of the campaigners are still met to a point. Because of the nature of the goals of these campaigners and the time sensitivity of the issue of people starving, of people drowning in the Mediterranean and in the Aegean, because of these, the refugees need food now. They need money now, and they need people to go and help now, ladies and gentlemen. So even if we see people giving emotionally and giving as a knee-jerk response to an image, we don't see how this is inherently bad, right? Because the refugees still get stuff sent over, still get money, still get volunteers, the people still get help. Here's why this only happens on our side. This part of the people who are not, as we said, not bad people, but kind of apathetic, would not be triggered to this extent by an image that wouldn't be this graphic. This only happens if I see the true horrors of the things that refugees are passing through. We think that these people might not become Mother Teresa because they saw a picture. We think that it's good enough in our case that they give food or that they give money to the refugees. Even if they don't become political campaigners, we still see benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, their side innately harms campaigners helping refugees. We are so, so proud to oppose. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for that speech and indeed thank everyone in the opening half. To begin the closing half of the debate, I welcome the Member for Government.
Check. Ladies and gentlemen, we all understand that refugees had gone through hard time and had suffered and they need immediate help. But as campaigners, we need to be strategic in helping them in a proper manner without hurting them, without erase any probability and put barrier for them to get the maximum help that they could get, ladies and gentlemen. This is why in our specific model, we want to deal with the campaign that will specifically focus in the statistic data, like A, how much money we need to help them, B, how many food or clothes we need to give to them, third, or C, what are the necessity to build camp and shelter for them. This is how society will objectively help them in a specific and targeted situations without any of emotional bias. This is why we understand that emotions is important, but somehow it could create bias that diminish and put barrier for you to help people, ladies and gentlemen. This is why we don't want to go with the opening oppositions. This is why under status quo, there is no response toward the statistic because our intuitive sense has gone dull because you already badgered by the pictures how people suffer, ladies and gentlemen. This is your only parameter. Will compare which one is more suffer, and this is why I will go and give them. We think that this comparison to compare people suffering are inhuman and evil, and this is not justify and even not help them to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. If the opening opposition want political pressures, it will be better when you go on the statistic data, ladies and gentlemen, because it's easier to say the change, how much people will, alleviate from the suffering and how much people will put in the shelter, compared to the only put the pictures, because you will only contingent toward the perspective and subjective feeling of people when they are feel cold, ladies and gentlemen. But at least we want to generate their intuitive sense to help people that in suffer, ladies and gentlemen. This is why emotions is really bad, and this is why the question then should answer by opposition, how much that help could be generated by only a pictures, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think it is enough. First, in my contentions, I will talk upon the ideal help and donations and comparative, proposal from the closing governments and opposition. Firstly, the ideal donations. We think that when you attract people only by pictures, it is contingent to their perspective whether they will think it is enough suffering for them till I need to help them or not, ladies and gentlemen. We think people have their own filter and degree about the standard of people that need help. This is very bad, and we don't think it should be continuous because we as a campaigners really care upon refugee and we want people to care upon them, ladies and gentlemen. This is why we thought that when you see pictures, the degree you will compare and the bias will go like this. First, when you see pictures of, African child goes into hunger, or even people from Syria that flew and they die in the shore, you will have an emotional bias, which one is more suffer till I need to help one of them. This is very bad because we want the help could go to any of peoples without comparing their suffering. They will go to the bias of skin colors, maybe to the race proximity, ladies and gentlemen, even to the religion's proximity. We don't think that this is good when you see pictures of African peoples that hungers and another people from another race. We don't think it is good. Second, you will also go to the calculation of physical conditions, which one is more suffer. And for example, these people are thinner compared people that flew from Syria to Europe. Then you need to help them first. We don't think it is good because you diminish another calculation of peoples that want to help peoples or refugee coming from Syria, for example, and it is bad, ladies and gentlemen. Lastly, you will have a bias upon geographical proximity, and it is also not good. At the end of the day, your target of campaign will always compare without calculating the true intention of helping people, ladies and gentlemen, and this is evil. Compared to our model, when you heard a campaign calling for help or statistic data, you will play in the intuitions of people's that calling help, for example. This is why we want to generate and we want to create a further calculations whether people need to, heard this calling without any of picturizations. Yes, opening.
Okay, if food and money still get sent over, why is this kind of bias inherently bad for everyone?
Because you only see which one of them that need to get help first. We already say this is not okay, ladies and gentlemen, because you need to help all of them without, under your perspective, maybe these people are suffered compared to the other, but for them, they all suffer, ladies and gentlemen, and they desperately need help. And you need to consider this to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. We think that help supposed to be not contingent to the graphic you see or emotion, because emotions is really unpredictable, or even it cannot be measured by any kind of measurement, and we don't think it is good to generate help. As a campaigner that desperately want to generate help, you need to go to more realistic situations, which way will create more help to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. This is why under situation when you don't see any pictures and you heard people die in Syria, your heart maybe not feel called to help them. This is what the worst situation prolonged by the proposal coming from the opposition. More importantly, you exploit the vulnerability of the peoples that need help. They might get protections, but you badger them with unimaginable pain every day through seeing the pictures of their boys die, for example, of their family dies, for example. We don't think it is human when you prolonging their suffering with these continuous depictions that will shown in the media every day, ladies and gentlemen. We think these help are evil and it is not good. Now, lastly, we think that it will create a bad discourse for the campaigner or even for the targeted society, because your focus is only and only to the degree they suffer without create a much more rich discourse upon what help they need and how much they need rice, for example, or clothes or whatever it is. This is why we want the discourse and specific help should go into the proper manner when you see what they really need and not only the degree of suffering of them.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech, and I now welcome the Member of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how many of who are here are aware of the fact that 200 kilometers from here, there are approximately 5,000 people waiting in line on a Greece-Macedonia border to get inside of Macedonia. The situation is horrific. Unfortunately, that horrific situation is much better rather than the situation that we were facing a month ago when the police was beating up people. Did you know how the problem got changed? Because campaigners went there, took photos of the situation, took videos of the situation, showed them to the Macedonian public. The Macedonian public did a number of protests,
pushed the government, and now the government has enacted new laws who allows refugees to safely pass from Greece to Macedonia. Now this is change, and this is something that campaigning with graphic images can bring you. What I'm going to do in my speech now, I'm going to present you 3 points of extension. The first thing, I'm going to talk about how we can only identify ourselves with images, how we can only identify ourselves with sufferings, especially when we are filled with so much information over the media and the internet. The second thing, I'm going to talk about the media and the social information that are accumulated. And lastly, and the most important thing in this debate, how through the graphic images we are going to be influencing our government, and we are influencing them right now. Before that, a few points of rebuttal from the first, then the second government. So the first government stands up and says 3 points. The first point being, right, we prefer rationality and use of rational information. This is something that was also explained by the second government. Now the problem here is that we want those information to be out there, right? We want people to know how much clothes they need. We want people to know how many people died. We want people to know what kind of food they need, whether babies need diapers. However, in order to capture the attention of the public for this information, we as an opposition are going to argue that we need those images. Second point, they talk about how this is a shock effect and it's only going to pass. First of all, we don't agree that having a shock effect is a bad thing, right? We capture people's attention. Secondly, even if it's a one-time shock effect, it doesn't happen one time, right? We see images every single day of different individuals, of different profiles of people. They say campaigners have a bias toward individuals, like we prefer to take shots of children. We don't see that as a problem. Biologically, we as individuals are much more prone to empathize with children rather than with grown-ups. But even if that wasn't the case, right? Even if we see different profiles of individuals, we see their suffering as something who is immensely bad, of course, but we see the bigger picture. Last point I talk about is human dignity. Now we say we still preserve their human dignity, but even if we preserve the human dignity because we're striving to use their suffering to help the situation and to help them. Secondly, because we believe that humans like empathy, right? Humans feel that they need to connect with people. They need to be understood by other people. When someone falls down, people use the positive energy that others give them. And lastly, the second government stands up and says, oh yeah, and the ISIS issue, right? ISIS uses this as a recruitment tool. Well, 2 points here. First of all, these people are running away from ISIS, so we don't see that point on their side. And secondly, because we see a lot of images for a lot of young women being raped and graphically shown, and that sort of image captures our attention when we want to learn about their stories to what happened. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the second government who says, well, this is additional suffering to them, relatives are going to see and they're not going to comprehend, and we're providing them with more pain. Well, first of all, we understand their suffering, and comparatively speaking, yes, it's a bad thing when you see a family member die on the news. But on the other hand, these people, first of all, don't have that much access to television, right? And secondly, because looking at the bigger picture, they are running away from a situation which we want to help. Let's go to extension, right? So the first thing we want to talk about is how we basically feel that in order for you to sympathize with someone, you need to connect with them and see it on a picture. Because we are all aware of the situation, and we're aware of the situation, that there is this huge thing, a migrant crisis. But when an image of a Syrian boy washed up on shore showed up, that's when the media frenzy started, right? That's when people started to care. That's when the social media accounts were filled with information. Now, why is that so? Because we as individuals can much easily empathize with other individuals who is our own age, right? We can empathize with someone who feels the pain, who we can see that they are hurting. Lastly, because we believe that when you see like a lot of statistics, you cannot empathize with the statistics because you cannot show human emotion and human sufferings within those statistics, right? Let's talk about the media. Why do we believe that the media, especially the social media that the campaign has used, is so much important? Because we as people only statistics shows that only in order to reach the best outcome of a video, you need to use like 40% maximum, 40 seconds maximum. What does that say to us? That says that people are too obsessed with information that you can only capture their attention for like 40 seconds. What this means, we have a lot of information being thrown at us, and we're not filtering that information. Like, in order to capture our attention, we need a graphic image who's going to capture that attention, and later on, that graphic image will be connected with like a huge text which we can read, and then provide us with the information. Why do we need to help these people first?
We say it's more like a falsification. So right-wing parties like the Golden Dawn in Greece, Front National in France, like the Golden Dawn in Greek, Front National in France are gaining more and more power. Do you really believe that their voters will finally change their mind after the 90-second picture?
Thank you, madam. I'm coming to that point. Why do we believe that this is the best thing that happened to refugees? We using graphic images. Because again, let's talk about a bit on an example of Germany, Macedonia, and Greece, right? So because countries are afraid to take in so many refugees of what people are going to think, right? What the public is going to think about them. They're afraid to accept refugees. We saw like a lot of several summits being done. However, there's no change being enacted. But when we see the German people react to images and start accepting people into their countries, and start accepting Syrians into their country, that's when they pushed the German chancellor to do the same thing. But more importantly, let's take a look what happens in Macedonia. Like 3 months ago, we all knew that there was a crisis. We knew that there were a lot of people on the border. We all understand that issue. The problem was we didn't see any images. And when we saw the images, that was when we pushed our government to change the laws and started letting them in the countries in order for them to pass, and started pushing the police to not be that much violence. So because we believe that the only way you can connect with someone and with the pain of someone is through an image, because we believe that the only way that you can push your governments toward change is to push the people to embrace the pain of other people, that's why you should vote the second opposition. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for that speech, and to conclude the case for the government benches, I welcome the government whip.
If the proposal coming from opposition that's powerful, we don't see the problem of refugee exists and the scarcity of help happen in status quo, right? But we see many white people in the United States of America, even European people, still don't want to send their donations because they see in graphic imagery still African American people over there, for example. Because people are selectively send their donation because they see this graphic imagery to begin with, right? But the case is that one picture goes viral, it's going to overwhelm another statistic and also another fact that need to be provided by government in making policy. Because society will actively pressure government emotionally and irrationally on that time. We think that's really bad on opposition side of the house, right? In my speech, I'm going to talk two things. Number one, why it is creating bad political pressure toward government to create incapacity of government to help refugee. And number two, why they create more unsustainable help towards refugee if you go to opposition side of the house, right? Let's analyze. We think in status quo, government and European Union, for example, like Greece, even Germany and France already have refugee in their own policy, right? Because they see that the problem is exists based on their own, our statistic, right? In their case, the society will actively oppress government because they don't see that the government already helped them. Because of this one picture, are overwhelmed the fact that the government already helped the society. It is result into society actively oppress government that we need to help them. We need to help the society. We don't see the calculation of government. It is we need to help right now or not. It is we need to help in the same capacity or not. Society actively oppress the government, for example, that we need to help in this far amount of money to begin with. We think that's really bad because you harm your capacity of government to begin with because you don't see the fact that that statistic exists. There's the fact that people people, how many food that we need to send to them, how many money that we create to make a shelter. That's what we need to create. In their case, we will not. Society will never satisfy in their case. People will never satisfy to oppress their own government to begin with. On that time, it is most unsustained because society feel that it is we're not going to support this campaign because people are rational to begin with, right? Why it is totally different? In our case, society will oppress the government. In our case, society will say to the government, you need to help the refugee. But based on objective reason, that's why we need to help them. In their case, will not happen. You only based on your emotional capacity that people coming from Syrian are thin, people coming from American are thin. That's why we need to oppress government. As democratic society, we need to question why government need to help certain society. You need to make society more rational in making that calculation to help. Because you use your taxpayer money to help society, that's why not only based on emotional capacity. That's why we never follow society demand on their emotionality, on subsidy, on oil subsidy, even another tax. If we follow society demand to begin with, that's really harm because that's unmeasurable to begin with. Opening.
Right, so why is logical thought and emotional response mutually exclusive, and why won't the first happen at all under our side?
Okay, it is leading into my second problems. Why this create more unsustainable help toward this individual to begin with? A, we think their campaign will not become more inclusive. In our case, we provide objectively, so no matter your race, your religions, and whatever, you're okay to help us because you provide based on the statistics and based on data. B, you create bad discourse. A, people provide the suffer picture, and another people provide the good picture one. This creates more discourse within society that the problem is not that severe in their case because there is a counter picture to begin with. But the worst case is that people, there is no accountability from the donors. Like they don't see how much government already helped them, how much people that already help this individual, because overwhelmed by this kind of picture that we need to help them in status quo. Like, we think it'll be better in our case because we provide more inclusive help toward this individual and not harm these people in the end of the day. We think it's most harm because you exploited vulnerability of individual in the end of the day. This will not sustain. Because of why? People will think I donate one, it is enough because the problem is the same. People are thin is the same because the picture are the same. Because the picture that you provide in viral are the same. So enough to help in one time. In our case, we're not. We actively say to you, the money is not enough. How much money that's not enough we will provide. How much shelter that will not provided by government. How much food that we can't help them to begin with. We think it's going to be more sustained because we invite the donors based on the rational calculation to begin with. In that case, will not happen. Most likely, campaigners will always use the photograph because that's the best way, like what they are claiming. What donors will feel that it is enough to help once because that's the problem that only say. But we need to take this on the ground. The problem is very diverse. People are come in very many backgrounds, not only represented by this one picture, even by these two pictures. People will only help by their case, only see this one picture's reasons. In our case, we provide the statistics even more. People will see even more help another calculation to help to begin with. This calculation will not result into people will postpone their help. But this calculation will result into more rational help and more rational pressure toward the government. Because the government in Europe, for example, even in case of Myanmar, many South Asian countries are overburdened by emotional power coming from individual. People coming from Western are actively oppressed government of Indonesia to help Myanmar refugee to begin with. Because they don't see the statistic that Indonesian government, even Malaysian government, already have this refugee coming from Myanmar. We think this is important to send a message to our society. This is the best way to begin with. They can win this debate if they can prove to us no one will have under this, there is no picture to begin with. No one will have in their case. Because of why? If you provide picture, people will not question what problem on the ground. They're overwhelmed by this type of picture. In our case, people will find new data to begin with. They happen on the ground because people provide them the statistic. In that case, will not. People will see oh, I'm sorry to what happened in Syria, sorry what happened in Africa, and just post in the social media and just post on their Facebook because they think that it is enough to help them by the way, by this type of pictures, right? That type of help will not happen because most likely what happened in society like now, people are helping each other through social media and enough to begin with. And that's viral through media, like we think that's bad because they think that's enough to say to society that you need to pay attention to Syrian people. You need to pay attention to another people only because you post this on Facebook, only because of posts on Twitter. In our case, will not. We invite them to the discussion and discourse. We propose the motion.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech, and to conclude the debate, I welcome the opposition whip.
Just a second. We do realize that people may have had defectual information about people coming to our borders, about people coming to Europe, Greece, Macedonia, and every other country that is affected by the refugee crisis. But it was first when the picture of the Syrian kid has actually been shown drowned on the shore. It was first when the pictures of policemen and reporters beating up refugees in Hungary, and it was first when the pictures were shown how police were beating up Syrians and other refugees in Macedonia, is when actually firstly people started to react towards the ignorant attitude that the European policymakers were having. But moreover, it was then when they first started to react in order to change the situation which was present into the society. I'm going to summarize this debate in 3 main points. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the rationality and the emotionality that was present in this debate. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the biases. And thirdly, I'm going to show you what kind of power actually an image can have and why does that go on our side of the government. First, rationality versus emotional. The whole government batch here was trying to tell you that what actually we need is a rational discussion. We do agree with the part that we do need a rational discussion. However, we don't believe that you can immediately impose rational discussion on a societal level. What you actually need is an emotional reaction, firstly for the people, in order to engage them into a rational discussion. What you need is actually to capture the attention of the people in order for them to be able to even react and in order for them to empathize. Because even the government themselves said that they actually did have the information. They did have the statistical data that both governments so much want to have. However, people firstly actually started to react when they saw the pictures of drowned kids, when they saw the pictures of people being killed, and when they saw refugees coming into our countries, which means that that is the moment when people actually try to react. We do believe actually that if you encourage the emotional reaction, you will be later to even encourage them more into a rational discussion, and that definitely goes on our side of the house. Secondly, let's talk about biases. This is something we mostly heard from the closing government. They said that the campaigners and governments are biased towards certain people. Firstly, untrue. As Teodora has explained to you, we do see pictures of people with different profiles and who are coming from different countries. And we even have examples of how this can actually be positive, because we can see that on Macedonian borders, for example, the police were mostly passing by Syrian refugees, however, not letting refugees from other countries. And after the pictures have been depicted and showed into the media, actually what happened is that people started giving free passes to all refugees who had the necessity to do so. And this is how actually a powerful image has brought actually a better change. But moreover, we believe that the fact that media show different people, different profiles of people, it actually gives opportunity to the other people who are seeing these pictures into the media in order to identify themselves better, because we do realize that people who actually see someone similar to them, it's much easier to identify and to empathize with them. And this is how you encourage discussion into the media. If opening has a POI, I'm able to, yes?
Wouldn't you agree that we were more and more implemented the option that the media is lying anyway, if the people feel that they just
Can you move out of the mic? I can hear nothing.
Sorry. Wouldn't you agree that we were more and more implemented the options that the media is lying anyway, if people feel that they just play with emotions instead of reflecting reality? And therefore, people are more likely to vote right-wing parties with political influence.
Thank you. I understand your point. Firstly, the ones actually, people are more prone to actually have emotional reaction and then rational reaction if you show them what is really going on. Because if you show them only statistics, this statistic actually can be much easily used by the other side that you're actually saying that these people will go to. For example, the xenophobic people, because they use the statistics in order to tell you how many people are going here. However, if you see a picture of people with dead bodies and human suffering, people do actually realize in what kind of situation these people are, and will more likely to engage into your rational discussion that you so much want to have when they first see the emotional image out of it. We don't believe that that goes on your side of the house. Now let's talk about the power of the image, and this was a very important extension that has been brought by Theodora into this debate. So what practically happens is that we do not believe that you can show real emotion into statistics, because we do realize that we need to capture the attention of the people in order to make them engage into a rational discussion. Theodora has explained to you in her extension how that people are so overwhelmed with information that we need to firstly show the most powerful things that are going to capture their attention. But moreover, she has explained to you that media are able to capture the attention of people for 40 seconds, which means that we do need the most powerful images we can actually have in order to encourage the people to actually react to the problem. But moreover, what we do believe is that people are ignorant solely to statistics and solely to text. And people will actually, they do need is something very simplified and something that is actually very visualized, which means that if you only show text to people, only statistics to people, they will more probably ignore it. However, Theodora has shown you that because people do react to these certain images, if you show them more images of people suffering, they will also be even more interested to read about the consequences and the statistic that you also so much want to have. And this is something that you can only have by having emotional reaction. But however, also this was brought from the opening opposition. However, Theodora does a very good job of explaining exactly to you how we pressure governments to change the laws. Because what happens here is that mostly the people, when they do not see the images, they cannot actually connect with what is going on with other people. But we have shown you the example of Macedonia, which when it was actually presented by images and videos how policemen are beating up refugees, people started protesting in Macedonia and in Greece in order to actually change the laws and give free passes to the people so that they can actually seek the better future and the better home that this whole debate here, both sides of the houses are trying to achieve. So what have we shown you today? Firstly, we have shown you that in order to have a rational discussion, you do need the emotional encouragement and you do need the emotional reaction from the people. Secondly, we have shown you that the biases will not be present since media do show different profiles, but even if they are, it can sometimes be helpful because they would bring benefits to the people and because different profiles can identify with the profiles that are similar to them. And thirdly, we have shown you how actually the pictures are the ones who capture mostly the attention and who actually make people identify and empathize with the people. And that is how you encourage a rational debate and change it in the society. We are very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the previous speaker and indeed thank everyone in the debate for what I thought was a great debate. Can we have another round of applause, please?